Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beats and Beyond podcast launched by me, Laughlin, or DJ Boomtown, hosted on my website, boomtownsound.com. I'm here today with Noah Pred. Noah Pred's from Berlin, but he's originally born and raised on Salt Spring Island. So his musical journey began on Salt Spring Island, where he honed his skills with local bands before discovering and developing his deep and abiding passion for electronic music. Known for his seamless blend of lush techno, dubby house, future-forward electro sounds, Pred has become an influential figure in the global electronic music scene. Immersing himself in Berlin's vibrant music culture, Pred has collaborated with some of the industry's most respected artists, releasing records on esteemed labels such as Cynosure, High Grade, Trapez Limited, and of course his own Thoughtless Music and Timeshare imprints. His unique sound has garnered widespread recognition and earned him a devoted following across the globe. How's it going today, Noah?
Yeah, wow. Thanks for that powerful introduction. I'm doing fine. How are you, Lachlan?
Yeah, doing really good. Super happy to have you here. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule to be here. And yeah, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So yeah, let's dive in here to some of the things that you're up to these days. What would you say is kind of your main, I'm gonna say, musical focus at this time, and we can dig into what's going on in your music world right now.
Well, I've been sort of dipping my toes back in the waters of performance a little bit post-pandemic. Definitely took some time to shift my focus and shift directions a little bit when we were all kind of doing the same, more or less. But it's been really fun to start doing some shows again here and there. Um, so I'm looking forward to doing that with you on Friday, which is how we got connected here. And in terms of my main focus these days, um, my music production has kind of shifted more towards a generative multimedia arts practice that still involves music production, still actively making records and releasing them kind of on some experimental formats, you could say, trying to experiment with new formats outside of the default streaming realm. Um, but the process of producing generative interactive multimedia work um, is fed into by the development of these tools that I sort of patched together in Max MSP, which is a sort of visual programming environment where I make tools that you know are necessary to interact with a participant. Could be anybody. I do some of these installations online. Some of them have been in venues. Um, and take that input and generate different musical output within the constraints of my aesthetic. And so that's been a really like fun challenge, I guess. You know, I get, I don't know if it's ADD or something where I get bored easily, but I seem to find new challenges for myself all the time. And I've been producing records for the better part of 2 decades or longer even, and this shift was already kind of coming about before lockdowns happened and all that, but that gave me a real opportunity to focus in these new directions. And yeah, it's been interesting, and I really like the idea that these tools that I've been able to create, that I've been forced to create through my own projects, are useful to other people who end up downloading them and purchasing them through my my company where I make them available, which is called Manifest Audio.
Right. So
So
that's
that's a
manifest. Sorry to interrupt, but that's manifest.audio. Is it .com or
Thank you for interrupting. Yeah, with the making the promotions easy on me, Laughlin. Yeah, manifest.audio is the website. If yeah, if there are any music producers listening to this who use Ableton Live, there's going to be something fun and useful for you on there. We have a bunch of free modulators and other things like that, and then a bunch of fairly sophisticated generative MIDI tools and a new suite of audio effects that kind of fits into the ecosystem that I've created with these tools, where they all have the capability to sort of seamlessly work with one another and actually even sort of talk to each other in a variety of ways. So
oh, nice.
yeah.
Yeah, so just in case we have some folks listening that aren't music producers, explain Max for Live a little bit to them, just to give a little bit of more of a background of how Max for Live works with Ableton Live.
Right. Okay. So most people, even if you don't make music yourself, you may be aware most people these days make music on a computer, and they do so using software called a DAW, which is acronym for Digital Audio Workstation. And those digital audio workstation softwares, they essentially replicate the functionality of a recording studio inside of your computer. And one of the most popular DAWs is Ableton Live, which I have been teaching people to use for a decade, and of course using myself. And a few years ago, they partnered with Cycling 74, the makers of Max MSP, which is one of the oldest music visual programming environments, I think dating back maybe even to the 70s, definitely to the 80s. And they incorporated it with Ableton Live. So when you're using a DAW like Ableton Live or any DAW, it's replicating the functionality of a recording studio, but maybe you want to use some instruments, virtual instruments as they're called, or effects, virtual effects that don't come with that studio, that are from outside of that studio. And in order to
Right.
do that, you use something called a plugin. And so Max for Live basically is a class of plugins that work seamlessly with Ableton Live and Ableton Live specifically. And there are many useful things about this, including the ability to easily and rapidly iterate and test and play around with different versions of things. I mean, you don't need to compile code like C++ or something with Juice, which is used. Okay, this is getting too technical now. I don't want to get totally lost in the weeds. Uh,
Right.
but it's much easier to quickly patch together some ideas and test them out and see if they work. And if they work, then continue developing them. And they also allow people to work a little more easily with MIDI. And MIDI is, rather than processing the sound itself, it's a way of processing or generating the musical ideas. So
Right.
which notes are going to actually trigger the sounds? And for me, that can be really interesting as well. I mean, the audio signal processing, I feel like, is a few degrees more sophisticated, and I'm
Right.
enjoying learning about it. But I felt like I would have more to contribute on the MIDI end of things, so that's been my focus with it.
Yeah, one example, I remember one thing that you could do with Max for Live, which I found really interesting, is you could hook it up to like a Nintendo Wii sensor, right? And use visual, like in the three dimensional sort of prompts to control an instrument like operator, for example. And it was a friend of ours that just, total music nerd, that it was like, here, check this out. This is a new thing in Max for Live, and you can control, by getting closer, getting further, waving your hands up and down, like it had up and down and forward and backward and a little bit of cross referencing. And that was something to be able to control. I'm not sure if, I can't remember what's the name of that fairly popular artist that she's developed a MIDI glove that does a similar thing to that. Oh God, what's her name? But yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's one application where it's like, okay, that you can interface with Ableton Live to create all these unique instruments that are, kind of outside the box of what comes with Ableton Live.
that's the beauty of Max, is it is a bridge to so many protocols, anything written with JavaScript. You can interact with APIs to do, like, for example, one of the multimedia real-time generative pieces I did was using Max to allow people to interact with the piece via Twitter. So it was checking Twitter for tweets with a very specific hashtag that nobody outside of this project would have been using. And if someone did a new tweet, including that search term, it would generate a bunch of changes in the piece, both to the audio and the visual. And that kind of thing is what Max enables. A lot of the stuff that I do is still just working within the context of Ableton Live, but exactly as you say, allows you to bridge via OSC to all kinds of controllers. And this is one of the things that's really fresh about it. It encourages that level of experimentation. There are other platforms like Bitwig is doing amazing stuff with, for example, the Grid, which is their kind of answer to Max MSP. And it's a very, very elegant solution, and I've enjoyed using it, but it's comparatively a bit sandboxed. They don't yet have modules that allow you to interface with these kinds of external systems
Right.
that may come down the line. But for now, it's Max MSP is the only playground that offers that. So yeah, and it's been really compelling. I kind of the way I explain it is like I've made music for quite a while, and I still love making music, but the experience is quite subjective. Like,
Right.
even if someone I care about says they like a piece of my music, that doesn't mean that I will like it. I might hate it by then for whatever reason. For
Right.
example, maybe that's not the best example,
Yeah.
but
No, I understand what you're getting at.
when I'm developing these tools, it's totally objective. It either does what I want it to do, or I need to keep tinkering with it. So it's a different, like, it scratches a different itch, you could say.
So tell me a little bit more about the multimedia practice you have, or is this the generative art? Tell me a little bit more about that. Is it the www.r-av.club?
Okay, so yeah, generative art is, I started making these tools that have generative capabilities, which means that you can sort of plant a seed, and with some degree of randomness, um, great or small, within constraints that the user can define, you can sort of unfold worlds of possibility rather than just making one single output, which would be a song. You can allow a system like this to create many, many outputs. In fact, a completely different output for each participant that's experiencing it. And so then the compelling thing for me there is that it becomes more like world building in a way, if that makes sense. So rather than just making a song, which I don't mean to make it sound as though making a song is like a lesser version of anything, because songs are awesome. But a song, in its conventional sense, is sort of a collapsation of musical possibility, right?
Right.
It's a fixed form, um, and it goes and lives its own life, and it'll meet people you'll never meet and get played in places you'll never see. It's quite incredible, really. But the contrast with a generative visual or audio art is that you've created a possibility space, and you've defined sort of the parameters of possibility that can be explored in that space, but it's impossible for you to explore every possibility yourself, perhaps, and therefore everyone engaging with the piece has their own completely unique experience of it, which maybe there are some affordances that allow them to drive that experience in one way or another. So for me, this is just a really compelling emerging art form. And so the RAV piece, it's semi-generative. This actually explores some tools I developed that I'm just putting the finishing touches on and hope to release in the fall. Was a suite of sonification tools. So
Okay.
sonification is the practice of taking any fixed set of data. So it could be, mm, something very personal, like birthdays of your family members, or it could be, uh, average temperatures over a period of time in a specific location, or it could be a basketball player's 3-point percentage over a number of seasons. And it will take that data, the tool I created, and automatically identify the lowest and highest value, and then allow you to remap those values into musical notes as you see fit, again, constrained through your aesthetic, your scale and key and whatever.
Wow, that's very
And
cool.
so it allows you to kind of embed real world phenomena into the music. Now, the scientific practice of sonification is meant to be very dry and to not embellish the data or make it like sound cool at all. But
Mhm.
these tools, while they would allow you to do that, that's not necessarily the point. I want people to incorporate the data as a um, creative starting point, and something to be interrogated creatively, perhaps. And so I ended up for this RAV piece. In talking with RAV, the Refraction Audio Visual Club, they wanted me to do an audio visual release for them. And yeah, this is another good example of my near masochistic impulse to like push myself to new challenges for one reason or another. But I'd been toying with the sonification idea for a while, and it seemed like a great opportunity to follow through and make it happen. So I developed these tools for this piece, and in exploring different data sets, kind of organically arrived at these data sets about, water, microplastics in water over time, access to fresh water, ice cap levels, all this kind of thing. And then on the other hand, the microplastics got me thinking, plastic is an oil product, right? It's a petroleum
Right.
product. And what's causing, ostensibly the accelerating ice melt, probably fossil fuels for the most part. And so then I started collecting some data sets about oil, kind of thinking to myself, it's kind of interesting, this idea that oil and water don't mix, or so the saying goes, at least.
Yeah.
And that this failure to mix could be a way of understanding some of the contradictions at the heart of our current climate breakdown
Yeah.
situation we find ourselves in, with record-breaking temperatures today for the umpteenth day. So yeah, I did 3 different versions of that. So all of the audio is generated from those data sets I just described. I needed a couple percussive sounds, so I did a little field recording of plastic filled with water. So it was still like playing with that oil and water
Right.
theme a little bit. And all the visuals are culled from different drone footage of oil fields and petroleum processing fields that I processed in an amazing piece of Canadian software called Touch Designer. Macs can do visuals as well, and I've done visuals in Macs before too, but I wanted
Right.
to try a different option for that this time.
It seems like these tools that you've created would be uh, great for collaboration between maybe, data analysts and musicians, or data analysts who are passionate about music but don't necessarily understand, how to produce music. Or and then I like what you're pointing to in terms of using it for, that kind of collaboration naturally sort of invites maybe a little bit of, sort of political to draw awareness to a subject, like there's room for a lot of collaboration with something like that. I'm kind of curious as to any thoughts about this club you were talking about. They invited you to create this piece, and then I really like the idea of who else would want to collaborate with something like this and create these. And I'm just curious, is the music very experimental? Is it or can it sound like a jazz tune, or you know what I mean? Like, tell me a little bit more about what it ended up sounding like.
Yeah, I mean, you can mold and sculpt it however you like, and these turned out to be kind of fast-paced electro numbers. I mean, it does raise some issues of like you could take civilian drone casualties and make it sound like a major key happy like bounce
All
through the
right.
park, so there's some possible issues there, but I'm very curious to see how people will explore these tools. And I think sort of the conventional way to bring real world phenomena and activist approaches into electronic music, into instrumental electronic music, has been through field recording, which is great. I love field recording, especially when it's pushed creatively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but this provides another avenue to do that. I think there was a time when I first became, uh, sucked in to the electronic music vortex, that it felt to a degree inherently political. That in order to enjoy electronic music at that time, it forced people to create alternative spaces, and just the sheer novelty of dancing for extended periods to this instrumental music in this dance floor context with powerful bass frequencies. There was a sense of connecting to something larger than the self that, again, felt inherently political. And I think there are still traces of that in contemporary electronic music, but I've also undeniably watched electronic music become increasingly commercialized and corporatized and all that kind of thing, which is inevitable. So I guess, yeah, my hope is that people will explore using these tools to embed some more creative level of activist exploration into their creative practice.
That's great. There's a local experimental sound festival that happens in November called Noise Tech. I'll definitely post it in the show notes because it's, even though it's called Noise Tech, it's not spelt that way. But yeah, they explore a lot of sort of experimental ways in which people produce music, and explores a lot of ambient textures, but also noise, and what noise can be used to produce and create. I'll definitely try and connect you with them because it's a fantastic it's a fantastic locals pushing the boundaries. Their current project that they do throughout the summer, which is not quite as experimental, a little bit more, uh, but also pushing electronic music, is Wonderment. I don't know if you've heard of that festival that's happening in Victoria currently. It's a couple different weekends in a row. But yeah, I'd love to connect you with them because that it's a you know they're through the Garden City Electronic Music Society, which is not for profit local thing that does a lot of. Yeah, I've been part of the festival 1 year, and they really, it's very interesting.
Yeah, it seems fantastic what they've been doing with Wonderment. I know one of the organizers for many years now, Dave Bodrug,
Oh yeah.
formerly Dubnostic. Yeah, no, it's fantastic to see what they've been able to put together. The noise tech, I'm not familiar with, so I'm definitely excited to check that out.
Yeah, well, he actually for the upcoming show at Moby's, he sent me a private message saying, "Hey, can you put me on the list? I'll still pay the $10, but I don't want it to sell out before I get there." And he's coming over on the last ferry, so
Oh, that's awesome.
we'll get to see him at the show. Oh yes, just so little shameless plug. We're playing at Moby's this coming Friday, July 21st, 9 p.m. till as late as they'll let us push it, but usually it finishes somewhere between 12:30 and 1. And it'll be myself, DJ Rowan, and Noah Pred rounding out the night.
Yeah, looking forward to sharing music with some island friends, old and new. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, talk a little bit about growing up on Salt Spring. That's a good transitional topic. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to be here at the beginning stages of your music career, and maybe some of the influences that you took from this place before you shot off into the world.
Yeah, so I moved here with my folks from Berkeley, California at the young age of 11 back in 1990. And it was, especially coming from that urban environment, it was pretty remote back then. And there was no internet, that wasn't a thing. So I felt pretty isolated. And I credit that shift with my embrace of music um, at that young age, partially as a coping mechanism because there just was not a lot going on here, and I think it's not only is the population grown, but I imagine as a young person on the island now, it's a lot easier to feel connected to global culture just because of the way internet connects people. But yeah, as I said, that wasn't really the deal back then. So um, started, I was already taking piano lessons when we moved here and studied piano for a few years and then switched to guitar. And then a friend of mine had a 4-track tape recorder, a Fostex that they weren't using. So I convinced them to let me borrow that. And my brother had uh, given me a TR-505 Roland drum machine.
Wow.
And I somehow eventually acquired a realistic Moog, which I wish I could remember what happened to that because it'd be worth probably quite a pretty penny today. But anyway, after high school, coming home every day after high school, I would record like 2 or 3 songs like every day. Just mm, I don't know where this stuff was coming from, but it was just a prolific period of output. I was playing a couple bands as well. Played bass in a band called Plan 9. Some Islanders might remember, as well as the Carrot Revolution. Um,
All right.
Couple island bands I played in. But then I must have been around 16 and was in Victoria for a Mudhoney concert and missed the last ferry home and met some other people there and asked what they were doing. And they said they were going to a rave. And I had just read an article about raves in Spin magazine, like earlier that month or something. So I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's go. And then I was pretty instantly hooked from that point on. And, a lot of the music I was into at the time was a little more, yeah, as the Mudhoney concert might indicate, a little grungier, a little rough around the edges, but I'd always held on to this love of funk and soul. and early hip hop, which I was into as well. But when I heard house music that first time, it was like a light bulb went off where I kind of realized where that lineage of music had sort of secretly ended up, in this super futuristic form, or at the time it felt quite futuristic. So, yeah, and the rest you could say is history.
So did you move to Victoria kind of shortly after that exposure to house music and electronic music?
I never moved to Victoria. I've never lived in Victoria. I stayed on the island until I was 18, going into Victoria often, sometimes Vancouver for raves almost every weekend. And eventually moved to Vancouver when I was 18 and was gigging there quite often. And then in 2001, moved to Montreal for 3 years. And
Nice.
then I had an internship at a record label there called Consigned Recordings. Um, and then, yeah, I had a pretty incredible time there. It was a huge shift, but it was a vital part of my musical education. Made a lot of lifelong friends during that time. Moved back to the Sunshine Coast for about a year and a half, where I did a record under this Shen alias that I think some people might be familiar with. And then moved to Toronto for almost 6 years. Again, had a residency offered to me, a DJ residency there, which was too good to refuse, and a few other reasons, and some new opportunities arising there. And it's where I ended up launching my Thoughtless Music imprint, which I eventually brought with me to Berlin when I moved there at the end of 2011. And yeah, I just felt like I had taken that label project as far as I could in Toronto at the time. And the next logical step was to um, set up camp somewhere in Europe. And where better than Berlin, which was even already then and kind of still remains a mecca of sorts for electronic music production and technology, and had quite a few friends there already as well. And
Nice.
yeah, that's where I've been for over a decade now, more or
Wow.
less.
Yeah, tell me, let's go rewind a little bit. So at what point did you first start releasing music in that sort of journey you just described?
Yeah, in Vancouver days, I had my first releases as the Sci-Fi Witch Doctor,
Sci-fi witch
which I
doctor.
remember fondly. And yeah, I've recently had a flurry of requests online for, it was like starting last November, December, getting all these random messages on Instagram and Messenger, people, strangers asking if I had copies of old Sci-Fi Witch Doctor records for some reason. But anyway, yeah, and then
And do
started
you do you
releasing
have
music
still have
under.
copies? Do you still have copies of those records?
There might be a few kicking around. I think I just found a CD of some of the Enter the Now full length, uh, which I won't be able to see if the files are extractable till I get back to Berlin, because computers don't have CD drives on them anymore. But I have one back there. I can test it on.
Yeah, I
Um,
have one computer, one Mac that's still got the CD drive, but if I put a CD in it, it takes like a month before it will eject it. A month of trying to eject it. I don't know what's going on. So it's just like
does it read
God,
it
God,
before you eject it?
God, God forbid I put a CD in there because it's just like you get the blue spinning ball of death, and then it's like, oh no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it does read it. I mean, I probably should just, because I still have I used to DJ with CDs and for quite a long time, and yeah, I have a great CD collection, but it's like I don't have any way to I think I still have like my possibly I have my Panasonic Shockwave kicking around somewhere to be if I want to listen to CDs, but Yeah, it's a weird. Maybe Martin will let me borrow his CDJs one time to go through all my old music or something.
The Panasonic Shockwave, that's a blast from the past. Those things were ahead of their time in terms of
Yeah,
the
the
whole
40
design
seconds.
aesthetic. They look great.
And they also had 40 seconds of like RAM basically to so if you were biking or walking and you bumped it, it had 40 seconds of memory to play the audio that it already had pre-analyzed.
So it was constantly buffering. Yeah, that makes sense. I never realized what the technology was. I never gave it much thought, but that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Anyways, that was just a little blast from the past. Tell me a little bit more about your record label. Is it just you release exclusively on your record label, or do you have other artists release on that record label? Um,
So thoughtless music, if that's the first one you might be referring to, I was releasing my music, but also many other artists, mostly Canadian, but from all over the world. And we hit the 100 release mark in 2014, and I hit the pause button at that point. It was just getting to a point where I felt like the administrative requirements were kind of beginning to outweigh the benefits that I would, and I really did enjoy, working with emerging talent and trying to cultivate their best work. There were a lot of really stimulating things about it, but I hit pause at that point and never felt compelled to start it up again. But timeshare, which is theoretically ongoing, I just haven't collaborated with anybody for a few years for somewhat evident reasons, one might say. That label is exclusively for my collaborations
right.
with people, and we choose a different charity to donate to with each release.
Nice.
Um, yeah, and the reason I haven't collaborated with anybody is I haven't found the experience of like bouncing files back and forth online to be particularly rewarding, you know? So if I'm collaborating with somebody, I like to be together in the studio. This is when you get a real dynamic energy coming together, it seems. So I
Yeah.
just haven't had many opportunities for that recently, but I look forward to and having timeshare as the outlet for that. But then I have a third label that I just started uh, purely for my own releases that I'm releasing through different web3 formats initially, and then using this label as kind of the streaming outlet for them, and that's called Predilections, which is uh,
Oh, that's cool.
just kind of a play on the name, But
Yep.
yeah, I still enjoy releasing music with other labels here and there. It's nice to have that extra layer of validation, as it were. But at the same time, with the current state of the music industry, it just doesn't make sense to
Right.
um, relinquish the rights and everything to a third party most of the time.
Right. You mentioned Web3. Maybe for the odd listener that hasn't dug into it, explain Web3 a little bit for people, and maybe the format in which you're utilizing Web3 to release.
Right. So Web3 refers to a huge umbrella of blockchain enabled technologies. And I understand certain people are allergic to that term, which is frankly totally understandable.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Because like
so
examples of the blockchain being abused and basically false flag projects. FTX is a really good example.
Right. Well, when people are knowledgeable about a subject and they see dollar signs and jump in, um, there's usually risk involved. And, I don't want to
Yeah.
get too off the rails here, but, FTX was breaking the law well outside of the purview of blockchain. And in fact, had they
Yeah.
been actually using blockchain for their accounting, it would have been much harder to rip
Yeah.
people
Right.
off in the way they did.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, we're looking now, for example, at this Actors Guild strike, where the last few days on Twitter, actors have been sharing their streaming revenues for huge hit series, and they got a check in the mail for like $11.27, which is, you know, a demonstration of the same issue that musicians have been dealing with for the last decade with their streaming royalties and the
Yeah.
race to the bottom of diminishing returns as rights are relinquished to all kinds of um, intermediaries, right? So
Yeah.
distributors, platforms, basically. Some refer to this as platform capitalism. So everyone taking all these platforms and the people supplying the platforms taking their chunk along the way, and a genuine, a general devaluing of art. I
Hmm.
think
Yeah.
perhaps younger generations don't might not have the same experience with music that you or I did growing up. Let's say
Yeah.
I don't want to make too many assumptions here, but what these blockchain solutions offer is mm, new opportunities for creators to engage directly with fans. And there's a few too many barriers to entry for it to feel as exciting as it could, like the ability for, you know, the average person to engage with some kind of blockchain website is it's still there's still a little too much friction there.
Yeah.
But um, for example, when I first began tinkering with this stuff, it was on a blockchain called Tezos, which is a totally energy efficient blockchain. One transaction takes less energy than sending an email or a text or what have you. It's using a proof of stake consensus. And because it was so energy efficient, many artists, visual artists primarily, who wanted to experiment with blockchains, NFTs as they're called, as the medium of
Non
um,
fungible tokens.
yeah, minting an artwork as a single um, unit that can't be broken down into smaller units on the blockchain. A lot of artists wanted to experiment with this in a ecologically friendly way, which is a category I fell into. And it also, because it was so cost effective, cheap, in other words, it was very appealing to artists from the global south and other regions that maybe couldn't afford the minting fees on chains like Ethereum at the time, which are still quite high.
Oh yeah. And not
So what?
depending on gas prices and all that at the
It,
time, right?
ex-
You got to have a program that just analyzes what the blockchain is doing and how busy the network is to be able to mint and do it in an affordable way.
100%. So the website I was exploring was called Hicket Nunk, which was launched by this eccentric Brazilian artist who, on Twitter, I believe his handle is Crazy Patchwork, and a huge community blossomed around this sort of um, minimalist, no holds barred website where people from all over the world were minting and collecting art for very cheap. And the beautiful thing is, I would collect a piece of art, and the Tezos, the currency on that blockchain, would go directly from my wallet directly into the artist's digital wallet, with a very, 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 very tiny fractional fee going to pay the Hicket Nunk website. Now, fast forward 6 months, this website has grown. There's a huge community around it, and the founder, as I mentioned, was a bit eccentric, and without going to the backstory behind it, decided to pull the plug on the website and took it offline.
Oh man.
Pa- Panic, right? Everyone's terrified. But because all the transactions are decentralized on the Tezos blockchain, and all the media was hosted decentralized on interplanetary file storage. I woke up the next morning, there were already 3 fully functional Meagher sites where you could engage with the entire, where your collection was intact. People were minting new works. Eventually, the community took over the original website. And this is really interesting to me because if Mark Zuckerberg decides to shut down Instagram tomorrow, all your content is gone because
Yeah.
it's
Right.
centralized and it's owned by Instagram. It's owned by the platform. So even though people panicked for about 12 hours, it ended up being the perfect poetic validation of this sort of decentralized approach
Right.
because everybody owns their work, and it's stored in a decentralized way that is resilient. And if we look at the last 20 years of what they call the Web2 model, you've got all these platforms enriching themselves, cashing in on our data. Um, Artists, fighting to pay for a week's groceries off of, a million streams or something. Um, so I'm not trying to say that Web3 will replace this technology, but I think there's a real need for more equitable and fair distribution models for artists. And are also simultaneously a lot of really playful and creative things that can be done with Web3. And so I'm, mostly out of curiosity and a bit of creativity, exploring what's possible with these models. I don't mean to proselytize or suggest that, people need to switch over to this type of system. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, there are still a few too many barriers to entry, but less barriers to entry than ever. If you're curious, it's not rocket science to get involved, but you do need to be wary of what remains a bit of a wild west and not
Yeah.
jump into promises of easy money or getting rich quick and all that kind of nonsense. But if you do some research and cross-reference that research and make sure you understand what you're doing, it's worth experimenting with. And that's kind of how I approached it, and immediately kind of got hooked collecting what I would call mostly digital native artwork, meaning artwork that um, is somehow dynamic, either animated, interactive, or both. So artworks that you can't just print out and hang on a wall and have the equivalent of that, and it's just a JPEG. I mean, I people do collect JPEGs as well, and I don't begrudge anyone such a collection, but that's not the direction I went. And so it seems like a unique medium for particularly this audio-visual work, such as I've done with the RAV Club. And yeah, there's some exciting new frontiers of possibility. Now, it
Are you going
reminds
to
me,
be are you sorry to interrupt, but are you going to be producing some of this art form as well for on the blockchain?
well, I have done a few collections of audio-visual generated works. There was the Escatons piece I did. That's on Tezos, and the RAV collection is actually on Ethereum, which is now proof of stake and therefore orders of magnitude more eco-friendly than it once was. But what I
Right.
was what I was going to say there is that it really reminds me of the early days of electronic music back in the mid to late 90s or early 2000s, where if you talked to the average person on the street, the only electronic music they had heard of was like Tiesto. So when all you've heard of is Tiesto, you're going to think all electronic music sounds like
Right.
Tiesto and is equally as cheesy and horrendous. It's very
Yeah.
similar now with the Web3 stuff. When all people have heard of or seen is Bored Ape Yacht Club or something similarly horrendous, it's natural to assume
Yeah.
that's also makes up the majority of what else is going on. But just
Well, in
like
the
electronic
media.
music back in the 90s, if you scratch below the surface and do some digging, you find incredible creative communities that are flourishing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the media seems to highlight all the big crypto disasters way more than it highlights the art and the these little pockets below the surface where like you say, like the art and the collaboration and then this open format of where everything is verified by the network itself. So it's totally decentralized in the sense that it's just like verified by all the people that are participating in the art form, but also the exchange of value, which I think is very powerful. I've been paying attention to the Web3 space and everything that's been happening in that space. And I have invested a little bit, but like everybody says, I don't give advice on it. Only put into it what you're willing to lose. Don't put in your life savings or anything. Just play with it, but with caution and with. I've definitely lost some money on projects like that did go under and then didn't resurface. Not a lot of money, just kind of play money. But yeah, you do have to be very careful and make sure that you understand what's happening. And I'm looking forward to the barriers to participation, kind of that friction you were talking about lowering, because I think, like you said, with the NFT, non-fungible token, you can release music and embed certain things in the smart contracts that are only accessible if you're participating in supporting that art and that artist directly, which I think could revolutionize the music industry and maybe already starting to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's useful to think about it as maybe a different form of merchandise in some ways. It's definitely collectibles, this ability create to artificially create digital scarcity, which is a difficult to concept to like it's counterintuitive. Um, but and I understand why there's resistance to it. But for me, and yeah, just to echo some of your earlier point, absolutely none of this should be construed as financial advice. And in fact, I avoid the financial side of this stuff and the financialization of it. It was more just fun for me to collect work from artists and engage with them in this direct way. But yeah, so I mean, the way that I like to think about this mm, seeming contradiction of artificial
Mm.
scarcity with the infinite reproducibility inherent to digital file formats is that the music wants to be heard and the art wants to be seen. I
Hmm.
don't I don't think painters paint a painting and think to themselves, I can't wait for this painting to be in this one person's hallway to only be seen by that one person and guests they choose to have over for, you know, the next few decades, if not eternity, and certainly not to be stored in the free ports that dominate the commercial art market, where art is basically stored as a financial investment commodity to evade taxation and never be seen by the likes of us. To the contrary, I think the art wants to be seen and the music wants to be heard, and this enables that. And so I think one of the actual conceptual issues with how people think about that stuff is that the word ownership is maybe not appropriate to talk about owning a
Hmm.
digital file or an NFT. It's maybe a little more accurate, especially in the case of artists and musicians, to think of it as a sponsorship. You're currently sponsoring that
Right.
piece of work, and people can see on the blockchain that your address is the one who most recently sponsored it, and you can trade on that sponsorship at a later date if somebody else wants to sponsor that work more than you do. But you don't own it in a conventional way of like you have it locked up in your closet and nobody else can
Hmm.
access it without your permission. And so this is the beautiful thing is it allows infinite access um, while also supporting the artist in a new way.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this possibility, and I'd love to be able to once I start releasing music, I'd really love to mint some NFTs and have some things in the smart contract that are just like super fun. I like the idea of embedding special benefits like dinner or like a chat on online chat or like I don't know. I've seen lots of really creative. I mean, a lot of people do the VIP pass forever to every show or something like that, and you've seen artists like God, I wish I had my references on point today, but there's that one really pretty popular EDM artist that's all how he releases now, and I mean he made like something like 3 million in a mint. Like was it Blot or anyways? Like I'm just not
Well,
following or I'm not following like the real hardcore sort of EDM artists that are. I know Snoop Dogg has been playing in the NFT space a little bit, and some other like it's really interesting because there is a side of it that is becoming commercialized and popularized, but I think it's still the idea of it, like you what you said about sponsoring, right? You're sponsoring this artist. Well, it's like, okay, yeah, you may not own this piece forever, but every time it trades, it can be written in the smart contract that the artist always gets like 10% of the trade or 15%. So it can really be this evergreen generative space that really supports the art and the artist. And I really hope that it goes a little bit more powerfully in that direction than rather than just being like another exclusivity type, I don't know, whatever, not scam, but like sort of play on the music.
yeah, well, we need to see more of the marketplaces held to account to ensure that artist royalties continue to be honored in the smart contracts,
Yeah.
um, and create some incentives for that to be the case. And then, of course, you're going to have your big artists making 3 million overnight like that. The rich continue to get richer because if they've already got that audience and fan base, then they
Yeah.
can leverage that. So for smaller artists, there's still a bit of a question mark as to the best way forward with these new technologies. It's simply clear to me that the old technologies are not really creating the sort of regenerative, sustainable value that I think should be available to artists. But just to quickly refer to one thing you said, I love the idea of like hiding little Easter eggs and bonus materials in the smart contract somehow. Although personally, I'm wary of promises being made in the smart contract to services that are essentially offline or not within the smart contract, like the dinner or the Zoom call is
Yeah.
cool and
Right.
all, but the VIP for life, like I don't understand how that can be guaranteed. So my personal approach is only to make promises that the smart contract itself is able to convey to the end user.
Yeah. I think in that one example, it was like there was only three of those particular NFTs sold. So it was like there could only ever be three people on that list. So and then if they sell the NFT, then they're no longer on that list. So
Yeah.
it does come with the ownership. And I mean, if you only have to have like, and it's not like they're going to be able to make it to every show, so there
Oh,
are limits
totally.
to it, right? So I don't know. It's just interesting to me.
But I mean, you're promising that the organizers of all those shows are going to
Yeah,
honor that. I mean, I guess it's just a guest list will call thing. It's
yeah,
not that complicated. But
yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
tend to
No,
stick
it's
to
true.
what was already embedded in it. But wow, I
Yeah,
did not expect the conversation to go so deep into this topic, Laughlin.
yeah. Well,
Been
I've definitely
interesting.
been as a DJ and musician and just somebody who's always been very attracted to emerging technology. I've been paying attention to the space and let's wrap things up. Where can people find you, find your music, and then maybe So 3 different things. Where can people find you? Where can they find your music? And then maybe if you want to shout out some other artist, some other person that either maybe would be a good example to have on the podcast, but also people should just check their music out.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, people can go to my website, which is just noahpred.com, and all of my labels and other projects are linked out from there. If you're interested in the music making tools I mentioned, you can go to manifest.audio. And all these will be linked in the show notes. Yeah, we'll put the
That's right.
timeshare and thoughtless music and all the collabs and whatnot down there. And then people can just search my name, Noah Pred, on wherever you listen to music. You should find a decent clutch of tunes on there. And an artist to listen to. I really liked artist. I believe she's an Indonesian producer living in New York City named Melati, ESP. That's been one of my favorite records the last few months. It's a little more mellow, but nice kind of breezy summer afternoon listening.
Nice.
Yeah, I think
We'll
we
throw
can
that in
leave
the
it
show
there
notes
unless
as
there's
well.
something else you want to grill me on, Laughlin.
No, that's good. I think we've hit pretty close to an hour. I know we started a little late, but yeah, that's great, Noah. Thanks so much for coming on my new podcast, Beats and Beyond. You'll be able to find that at boomtownsound.com/beats and beyond. And yeah, have a great day. And hopefully we'll see you. I'm going to try and get this podcast out before the show. Hopefully we'll see you at Moby's Pub on Friday, 9 o'clock, $10 at the door. Me, DJ Boomtown, DJ Rowan, and Noah Pred, all the way from Berlin.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Peace out.